During the past 2 centuries, one of the most disturbing worldwide trends has been the environmental destruction evident on all continents and in all kingdoms. Forests have been burned, animals slaughtered to extinction, and the very face of the earth sometimes left scarred and barren. But despite the discouraging statistics we read, the other side of the story is that in many quarters, in response to the outrage, numerous groups of concerned individuals have banded together, intent on confronting the causes and outcomes of environmental injustice. The esoteric teachings that assign to humanity the responsibility for protecting and uplifting the lower kingdoms seem in our time to be taking command. Today I will recount the story of one such individual, Sebastian Churwa, who worked in the East African country of Tanzania and lived on Africa's highest mountain, Kilimanjaro. During his lifetime, he planted over 2 million trees. Among them was one that was particularly close to his heart, a tree that is poetically called the tree of music, because it is utilized to create the woodwind instruments used throughout the world. Its botanical name is Dalbergia melanoxylon. It is commonly known as African Blackwood, Grenadilla, or Mpingo in its homeland. It is one of the world's most exquisite and expensive woods and is the national tree of Tanzania. During his lifetime, Sebastian had seen its numbers diminish to near extinction in northern Tanzania and devised a strategy to take action to preserve the species for future generations. His ideas became the inspiration for the work during the past 20 years of the African Blackwood Conservation Project, a cooperative effort between Sebastian, my husband James Harris, and myself, which is dedicated to the replanting of this important and highly threatened tree species. To our great loss, Sebastian is no longer with us, as he died unexpectedly of a massive stroke 2 years ago at the age of 60. His wife, Elizabeth, their 4 children, and her brother, Dismas Macha, are continuing to carry through on the work that he began. I would like to make a mention of the photographs in this talk. I accessed some from the internet, but all of the wildlife photos and all of the project photos were taken either by James or by Sebastian. The radiant garment of the planet. The vegetable kingdom, the second kingdom in nature, holds a unique place among our planetary life streams because on its own plane it is the most highly evolved. Within the larger solar system, each planetary scheme evolves its own specialized contribution to the total expression. For Earth, this has been the beauty and glory of its plants and trees, which exhibit a purity of expression and relative sinlessness that is unsurpassed in the other kingdoms. In its aspiration, magnetism, and radiation are demonstrated for all the first indication of the glory of the path ahead. Because it has advanced so rapidly, the second kingdom has reached the human equivalence of monadic consciousness, seen in the fact that it demonstrates through 3 rays, which are analogous to the 3 periodic vehicles of the human: personality, soul, and monad. Whereas for a majority of humans, monadic consciousness lies in the future, the second kingdom has already achieved a 3-fold fusion. The 3 rays it demonstrates are the 2nd, the 4th, and the 6th. The quality of the second ray of love is revealed in the magnetism of the kingdom and the attractive beauty of its flowers and perfumes. The fourth ray of harmony is seen in the uniformity of the color green of its life forms. For this reason, the second kingdom is known as the radiant garment of the planet. The sixth ray of devotion is displayed in the budding sentiency and aspiration shown by the lifting of its leaves and flowers towards the sun. For every root race, the note that is sounded by its humanity is that which determines the basic note of the vegetable kingdom of its era. In our times, the grasses, fruits, and vegetables have been vital for nourishment, and trees have been of fundamental importance in the great structures we have erected and the sophisticated habitats that have become our homes. Equally have trees been utilized to develop creative forms of artistic expression. The civilizations that have come and gone through history would have been very different, lacking the unique contribution of the second kingdom. History and use. In antiquity, Mpingo was called ebony, and we find historical evidence of its use as a precious commodity for the past 5,000 years. In the tombs of the pharaohs of Egypt, there have been found funeral urns, boxes, beds, chairs, and footstools of the wood. One of the oldest is a carved relief depicting events in the life of the third pharaoh Den, dated to 3100 BC. A child-sized Blackwood chair inlaid with ivory, gold, and silver on the left there was found in the tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun, who ruled in 1332 BC. Today, the best-known use of the wood is for the manufacture of woodwind instruments such as clarinets, flutes, bagpipes, oboes, and piccolos. Its density, oiliness, and dimensional stability give it an unmatched tonal quality and the capacity to be machined like metal. In Tanzania, the Makonde carvers have established an international reputation for their highly stylized artwork using primarily Mpingo. Their unique tree of life carvings depict the interweaving of the generations, and their Shetani art forms are religious images of the spirit world. In Europe and the US, the wood is used for ornamental turning, a style of lathe work that creates intricate geometric patterns on a workpiece. My husband, James Harris, is an ornamental turner, and he considers Blackwood the most superb material he has ever utilized. These pieces were created by James. And I have brought examples of the Makonde art and some of James's work over there on the table, if anybody cares to look at it more closely. The resource is also used domestically within Africa for construction, fuel, medicine, and unfortunately, charcoal. Conservation status. African blackwood is an extremely slow-growing species, taking between 70 and 200 years to reach harvestable size. This fact alone has discouraged replanting efforts on its behalf. As far as we know, the ABCP is the only organization that has carried on a long-term replanting program for the species. An added problem is that milling of the wood is extremely wasteful, because the bole of the tree is often cracked and furrowed. Up to 90% of a tree often ends up in the reject pile. In 1992, a British document entitled The Tree of Music raised a warning in conservation circles about the plight of Mpingo in its homeland. Over the next several years, an international alliance between Kenya, Germany, and the British conservation group Fauna and Flora International sponsored several initiatives to regulate trade in the species, but efforts came to nothing due to strong opposition from Tanzania and Mozambique, which is where the primary places where the wood is being harvested now. In 1998, the tree was listed as near threatened on the IUCN Red List, but it is generally acknowledged that its true status is probably far worse because of the inadequacy of assessment data. Once plentiful in Kenya, it is now commercially extinct in that country, and its only two remaining areas of harvest are southern Tanzania and Mozambique. During the past 20 years, little further attention has been accorded the problem. Meanwhile, pressure on the resource continues to grow, particularly due to an increased tourist trade and the aggressive entry of China into the African marketplace. In Africa, they're actually carving Coke bottles out of Mpingo for the tourist trade. Sebastian and Elizabeth. Sebastian's father was an herbalist, and at an early age, Sebastian already knew the names and uses of plants of the dense forests surrounding their home on Kilimanjaro. After a formal schooling in botany, he worked for 17 years as a conservationist at Ngorongoro Crater Conservation Area, where he cataloged the plants in the crater and instituted numerous conservation programs. He set up his first tree nurseries among the Masai cattle herders of the area and instituted a widely emulated program for protecting the endangered black rhinoceros. He also worked with anthropologist Mary Leakey in nearby Olduvai Gorge in documenting the plants of that area. In 1992, Sebastian moved his family back to his ancestral home on Kilimanjaro and began to work as a safari guide. Since his youth, the ecosystem of the mountain had suffered severe damage due to excessive tree cutting and stream erosion. Water sources were beginning to dry up, a precarious situation for a massive watershed that supplies the needs of downstream users for hundreds of miles in every direction. His wife, Elizabeth, was a primary school principal, and together they decided on a plan to work through the school system to introduce conservation studies into school curricula and institute direct action initiatives like school nurseries, tree planting days, and public education. Over several years, they established over 100 conservation groups in local schools and worked in an advisory role with adult groups who also sponsored conservation initiatives. At that time in Tanzania, women were just being given the right to own land. They had passed land acts, and women had not been allowed to own land before that, and that meant that they couldn't grow trees or cut trees. So Sebastian organized a lot of women's groups, or organized that energy and got a lot of women's groups started there. They were really anxious to be able to pitch in and help their country. The African Blackwood Conservation Project. James and I had our first exposure to Sebastian's work in 1996 when we saw the Tree of Music documentary. Sebastian was featured in the film and was shown in his nursery tending Mpingo seedlings. He commented, "My 200 Mpingo seedlings are obviously not enough to make much difference compared with what is being lost. But next year, I hope to have 20,000 seedlings to plant. It is vital for me to act now rather than wait until the future when things have reached a crisis. James felt an immediate affinity with Sebastian and determined to trace him down and offered to help. Sebastian was delighted at the prospect of working together. James always liked to joke with people that he and Sebastian were long-lost brothers separated at birth. When the ABCP was established, it was able to build upon the foundation that Sebastian and Elizabeth had already formed within the Tanzanian conservation community. Sebastian and his co-workers decided on the project work, and James and I did publicity and fundraising. We designed a website, wrote grants, and published a yearly newsletter. All of the funding received was used to cover the work in Africa, and much of the work was done by volunteers. The first project was the establishment of the Moshi Mpingo plot nursery, south of Moshi at the foot of Kilimanjaro. This has remained the heart of the project through the years. Several buildings were constructed, and full-time nursery attendants managed the production of seedlings. Mpingo is traditionally considered difficult to grow, but Sebastian perfected a methodology for sprouting and transplanting that resulted in a high success rate. In addition to Mpingo, we also produced trees for domestic use within local communities. An Mpingo orchard was planted at the nursery from genetically diverse seeds that Sebastian had gathered from multiple locations. This orchard now supplies many of our seeds. Educational campaigns and an environmental choir were organized to raise community awareness about conservation and tree planting. The grounds of churches, schools, municipal areas, homes, and farmland were found to be excellent planting areas where the trees would be tended and protected. Acreage donated by the villagers of Makuyuni was cleared and planted with Mpingo. The Moshi Police Academy started an Mpingo planting program on its grounds. During the following years, Sebastian's work was accorded wider recognition. In 2002, he received an Associate Laureate Award from the Rolex Awards for Enterprise. The same year, he received a Spirit of the Land Award at the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, Utah. In 2007, he was honored with the J. Sterling Martin Award, the National Arbor Day Foundation's top honor. In 2008, he became affiliated with the World Forum Foundation, dedicated to nature education for youth, and he and Elizabeth attended conferences in the U.S. and Ireland. Through these honors and international connections, he was able to lend his voice and exchange ideas with some of the world's top conservationists. In 2004, he celebrated the planting of 1 million trees. In 2011, the planting of 2 million trees. In his final years, he started a program to produce disease-resistant coffee varieties for the coffee farmers of Kilimanjaro and organized local villagers to develop biogas technology. The kingdoms of nature. The soul of the tree, identical to the soul of any entity, is the expressed evidence of its function and purpose and the contribution it makes to universal life. To see Mpingo in its natural habitat, one would never suspect its artistic and commercial importance, as it is unremarkable in appearance and solitary, preferring semi-arid lowlands and rocky soils. It seems to thrive on adversity. Yet it is a beneficial species. As a nitrogen-fixing legume, it enriches the soil, and its leaves are favored by grazing animals. On our planetary entity, the Earth, The lower kingdoms represent matter, and the spiritual hierarchies the spirit aspect. The unique attribute that the human kingdom brings is its role in developing manas, or mentality, the binding force between the two. In its role as an agent of cohesion, the human stands at the midpoint of the evolutionary process. While striving for its own higher realization, part of its evolutionary responsibility is also to the kingdoms below, stimulating and illuminating their inherent spirituality and transmitting energy to them from above. In this role, humanity is uniquely the caretaker of nature and holds a sacred responsibility to the earth. Nature has been given to man, and equally so has man been given to nature for the mutual edification of each. One need not perish at the expense of the other. Within the eternal design, there is an interweaving reciprocity between all the kingdoms. Each builds on the other, and all sacrifice the essence of their own nature so that the others might live. The minerals, vegetables, and animals have formed the very bone, blood, and sentiency of humanity. It is humanity's task, in its own position as a higher evolution, to give like recompense to those kingdoms of its origination. It is a difficult balance of thought to honor nature and its life, and that at the same time to justify its use for human purpose. Yet the kingdoms of nature have their own evolutionary goals and are also subject to the laws of sacrifice. They also attain higher refinement by subjecting their own needs to the needs of the others. It is not for humanity to preserve nature in its original pristine condition, but to interact and utilize its products in a wise and balanced fashion. Such utilization progresses the evolutionary path of each. Key to the relationship, however, is balance. When humanity sounds too strong a note, it has the ability to drive out the life of the forms in nature, and we may be witnessing this in our present time. And going forward, we must hold to the thought that the same humanity, which has the intellectual capacity to produce the creations of modern technology, can likewise find intelligent solutions toward sustainability of its natural resources. Sebastian Churwa was a child of Africa. His energy and charisma inspired all with whom he worked. He loved the people, the land, the trees, and wild things as a part of himself, and referred to himself as a bushy man. He was a great teller of tales, and his friends will always remember his skillful mimicking of animals and entertaining stories of the many safaris he guided. His true expertise and gift to the world, however, lay in his eternal concern for the future generations and in his ingenious ability to devise solutions that could balance the needs of the people with those of the ecosystems in which they live. He was a great African and a great citizen of the world. It was our honor to have been his friends and to have helped make some of his dearest dreams become reality. In closing, I have a very brief video clip of Sixtus Koromba and the Kibosho East Environmental Choir. They're singing a song that Sixtus composed. It's called Green is Beauty. Thank you.